Good morning, eighth graders. Good morning, Mobile County. Good morning to Lott Middle School. Shout out to my principal, Mr. Golden, my assistant principal, Ms. Merriman, my eighth grade team. I'm excited to be here with y'all today because I got somebody with me, but we're going to get to that in a minute. We are still talking about analyzing conflicting information. So last week, when we were looking at this, we were talking about the standard RI 8.9, which talks about analyze a case. Remember, we said that's a situation in which two or more texts, so whatever types of text they are, whether it's a fairy tale, an article, a news piece, and today you'll see that there's another type of text that you can look at, providing conflicting information, so information that disagrees about a particular point on the same topic, and identify, so figure out, point out where those texts disagree on matters of fact or interpretation. So remember last week we talked about fact or interpretation was talking about statistics or things that are factual or how they see it. Okay, and last week we looked at Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty, the same story, and they had a differing in what was wrong with the story. And then we also looked at two texts on e-cigs, whether they should be banned or regulated. And so that was that informational text. Okay, so today you're going to be looking at poetry. We haven't done that just yet. I did point out some little rap songs to y'all, but today we're going to truly be looking at poetry. And you're going to be focusing on analyzing the different interpretations today. So we're going to dig deeper into that text today. And I am not going to be your presenter today. I'm super excited because I got somebody to help me today. And I know that y'all are going to listen to her and take all your notes. I know you already got your snacks and everything. And our special guest this morning is Miss Kaiser, okay? So you guys make sure you make her feel welcome. Make sure you're paying attention. Make sure you're taking those notes.
Hi, I am Mrs. Kaiser, and I am from the University of South Alabama. Today, we are going to continue with the RI 8.9 standard. We're going to be focusing on 3 different poems that are on the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all experiencing today, and we're going to talk about how these interpretations differ from poem to poem. The 3 questions that we're going to ask ourselves today are, the first one being, what is the author's perspective? The author's perspective is who the author is, where they fit in the world, and how they view what's going on during the COVID-19 pandemic. The second question that we're going to talk about today would be the poet's tone. That is the poet's attitude towards the event. Lastly, the question that we want to ask ourselves while we are analyzing these poems is, how does the author's tone influence the mood of the poem? Now, mood is the response that we feel emotionally as we're reading the poem. This is our first poem for today, and it was written by Kitty O'Mara. She's a retired teacher, and the title of her poem is In the Time of Pandemic. As the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply, some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows. Let's take a moment here and discuss what we talked about in this first section, what was talked about in this first section of the poem. What is the author saying? In the first section of the poem, the author is pointing out all the different activities that can be done at home during the pandemic or the stay-at-home order. How do we know that this is what the author is saying in this first section of the poem? We know that this is what the author is saying because she gives us different examples of what you can do at home during the stay-at-home order. We have exercising, meditating, praying, and dancing as some of the different activities that can be done. Now let's move on to the next section of the poem. And the people began to think differently, and the people healed. And in the absence of people living in ignorant, dangerous, mindless, and heartless ways, the earth began to heal. Now there's a lot to unpack there, but what do you think the author is saying in this section of the poem? If you're saying that you think the author is pointing out how because people are at home and they're doing things that they love, they're being able to heal their minds and refresh. And at the same time, the earth is being able to do it as well because we're not causing extra pollution or anything, driving around and doing things that would, mindless behaviors that we would take for granted because we're all at home, and the earth is able to heal from that, from those mindless behaviors or dangerous behaviors. So if you said that, you are correct. Let's read the last section of the poem and analyze that section. And when the danger passed and the people joined together, they grieved their losses and made new choices and dreamed new images and created new ways to live and healed the earth fully, and as they had been healed. Take a moment to think about that last section of the poem, and then I'm going to talk about it. So in this last section of the poem, what the author is saying is she's proposing that after the danger is over, when the danger passes, we'll be able to join back together as new and better people. How do we know that that is what the author is proposing? We know that that is what the author is proposing because she says when the danger passes or when the pandemic passes, and then she goes in to describe 3 new ways that we can start to live. She uses the word new 3 times. New choices, new images, and new ways to live. And she says all those new ways to live and those new images and those new choices will bring us to a world that is healed, not only for us, but for the earth as a whole. Let's answer a few questions on this topic, on this poem. First of all, can you remember who wrote this poem? If you said Kitty O'Mara, a retired teacher, you are correct. Now here's the next question. What is the poet's attitude toward the pandemic? A, does the poet have a sad or uncertain outlook? B, does she have a positive and optimistic outlook? Or C, does she have a negative and playful outlook on the situation of the pandemic that we're all facing today? Take a moment and think about that, and then I'll let you know what the answer is. If you said that the poet has a positive and optimistic outlook, you are correct. Now think about why a positive and optimistic outlook is the right answer, and that'll help us answer the last question, which is, how do we know that this is the author's attitude? Take a few minutes, okay? We know that the author's attitude is positive and optimistic because she talks about everyone healing, not just everyone, but the earth as a whole healing, and she's super hopeful for what is to come after the pandemic has ended. So we know that she is positive and optimistic based on the fact that she knows that she presumes or proposes that healing is what's to come after the pandemic has ended. Now let's talk about our next poem. This poem was written by Katie, a high school student. She titled her poem, The Virus. Here I sit, in complete isolation, all of us separated by the invisible. I would reach out to you, but a simple elbow touch wouldn't do. Lysol spray has become perfume. Hand sanitizer has become hand lotion. The news has become the Bible. Now, what is the poet saying in this first section? In this first section of the poem, the author is talking about, or the poet is talking about, the new normal that we are all experiencing because of the COVID pandemic. How do we know that that is what the poet is talking about in this first section? We know that this is what the author is talking about because she compares the old way of life or the old things that we took for granted with the new things that have become essential. She talks about 3 things or makes 3 comparisons in this first section of the poem. She says Lysol has become perfume, Hand sanitizer has become hand spray, and the news has become like the Bible. She compares those three old things that have been replaced with the new things to show that we are now living in a different time that we were not ready for or uncertain about. Let's go on to the next section of this poem. A simple virus whose name resembles royalty has done the unthinkable, destroyed businesses and ruined relationships. The death toll rises and hope decreases. What to do? Now, in this part of the poem, what is the author saying? In this part of the poem, the author is talking about the effects the virus has had on everyone during this pandemic. How do we know, or what examples from this section can help us answer that question or prove that our answer is correct? We know that she is talking about the effects the virus has had on us, on the world during this pandemic, because she gives us three examples. She talks about destroyed businesses, ruined relationships, and how the death toll has risen during this time. Now, to end this section, she asks us a question, or she asked a question: what to do? Think about that question as we analyze the last section of this poem. Everyone scrambles to find a solution. Maybe it is found in the empty grocery shelves, or maybe in the fears of going outside. Online assignments plague the uninfected, but I believe we will get through this together. We will get through this, just not with each other. Now, this section, what is she talking about? In this section of the poem, she's trying to answer the question that she posed at the end of the second section, what to do. Now, as we reread or kind of look over this last section of the poem again, did she get an answer to her question? She does not. She is still very unsure of what we're all going to do during this time of pandemic to get to the other side. But what is her final declaration at the end of this poem? Her final declaration is, we will get through this together. We will just not do it with each other. Now let's analyze this poem by answering the three questions that we answered for the first poem. Who wrote this poem? If you said Katie, a high school student, you are correct. Good job. What is the poet's attitude toward the pandemic? A sad and uncertain outlook. B, a positive, optimistic outlook. Or C, a sad, unbothered outlook. You all may be debating between two of these answer choices: A, a sad, uncertain outlook, or C, a sad, unbothered outlook. Let's take a minute and talk about why C is the incorrect answer. C, I'll give you a chance to think about that and then we'll go over it. C is the incorrect answer because throughout the poem, she is very concerned about everything that's going on during this pandemic. She talks about the destroyed businesses and the ruined relationships. So we know C cannot be the correct answer. So what is the better answer choice? A sad, uncertain outlook. How do we know that this is the author's attitude from throughout the poem? We know the poet is sad and uncertain because she talks about the devastation continuously through the poem, and she's super unsure of what's to come after the pandemic has ended. She never gets an answer to her question, what to do. Now let's go in and analyze our last poem for today. This poem was written by Ellis Friday, a 7-year-old. She did not title this poem. Hi, my name is Ellis Friday, and I'm giving COVID-19 a not today. How could you be so sure, you might say? Well, my mom stays home and my dad stays home, and FaceTime is the only way I can play. Just kidding. There are many ways to play without COVID-19 in your way. Find some bugs and give them some love, as you wouldn't be here without them. Hey, hey, hey. Now this poem is a lot different from the poems we read before. Let's kind of break down this poem into sections as well. In the first part of the poem, what is Ellis talking about? In the first section of the poem, Ellis is declaring that she's not allowing COVID-19 to ruin her day. What example from the poem helps us know that our answer or our inference is correct? We know this because she says it. She says, I am giving COVID-19 a not today. Let's move on to the second section. What's going on here? What is Ellis talking about, or what is she describing? In this section, she points out 3 different downfalls during the COVID-19 pandemic or during the stay-at-home order. Let's go over those and analyze those 3 different downfalls. Her mom is at home. Her dad is at home. Neither of them are working. And lastly, she says FaceTime is the only way she can play, or in other words, FaceTime is the only way for her to spend time with her friends. Is Ellis really sad or really upset about these 3 things, these 3 downfalls? She's not. She lists the downfalls, and then she ends the poem with saying, just kidding. So that means, yes, these are issues and these are downfalls, but they are not going to hold her back from having a good time. Let's look at the last section of the poem. What is she talking about in this section? In this section, she is talking about and she's focusing on she's focused on that COVID-19 is not going to stop her. And she tells us about one of her favorite activities to do while at home. What is her favorite activity? Her favorite activity is finding bugs in the backyard. Now, that wouldn't be my favorite activity, but if Ellis likes it, then I love it. So can you all think of any activities that you enjoy to do at home, or can you find a bright side to the COVID-19 pandemic for yourselves? Let's think about that question for a moment, and then we'll go back to the poems. Okay, who wrote this poem? If you said Ellis Friday, a 7-year-old, you are correct. What is the poet's attitude toward the pandemic? A sad, uncertain outlook. B, a sad but optimistic outlook. Or C, a positive, unbothered outlook. Think about that for just a moment. If you said C, a positive, unbothered outlook, you are correct. Good job. Now, let's think about how we know that this is the author's attitude throughout the poem. Think about that question, and then we'll go over it. We know that the poet has a positive and optimistic outlook throughout the poem because she's unbothered and she's super hopeful that she can find other ways to play while at home. She talks about playing with bugs. She says there's many other things that she can do, and she's not going to be focused on what she can't do and what the different downfalls, like she can't hang out with her friends every day, because she's going to make the best of her time in isolation. Now, how do the three poems that we just read about, how do they differ? The first poem is very hopeful and optimistic for what's to come after the pandemic. However, the second poem is more focused on things that have been taken away and everything that has changed because of the pandemic. And lastly, the third poem refuses to be bothered by the pandemic and focuses on the new things or different things that make them happy at home. So why might these poems or these poets interpret the pandemic so differently? The most significant one would be the age difference. We know our first poet is a retired teacher, so she's a mature adult. Our second poet is a teenager or a high school student, and our last poet is a young child. So because the range is so different between their ages, they are able to experience and understand or work through the complications of the pandemic a lot differently. The next thing that might be the reason why these poets' interpretations of the pandemic differ is the degree of change they've had to go through. Now, the first poet, as I said, is a retired teacher, so she's probably more used to being at home and enjoying the activities in the house. Whereas the high school student, she was in school every single day, working with her teachers and working with her friends, and she might have lost her graduation or prom because of it. Now we have the connection with the sick or the deceased. This could be they may empathize with the people going through the pandemic a little bit differently. Lastly, financial hardship is another key factor that might affect someone's interpretation of the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you think of any other reasons? But as we close for today, I have one question for you. Well, two questions. What is your perspective on the pandemic? How, if at all, do your views conflict with the three poets? Thank you so much for sharing. My name is Mrs. Kaiser, and I'm from the University of South Alabama. You all enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.